And with that, I will introduce everybody, welcome you to our webinar on gardening in the Southeast. My name is Diane Blazek. I am the Executive Director for both All America Selections and National Garden Bureau. And I have with me Gail Pabst, who's making everything run smoothly, and she's the reason you heard about this webinar. I do want to tell everybody that you are welcome to put whatever you want in the chat. Tell us where you're from, ask any questions that you have. We will monitor the chat for questions and we will ask our panelists. And with that, I want to introduce our panelists. So I will name all three of you, and then you guys can just jump right in and introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about your company. So we have Peter here from Bayer Seminis, we have Steffi from Syngenta, and we have Tracy from Cicada. So which one of you would like to go first and introduce yourselves?
Well, let's go for it. So I'm Steffi Hugo. I am with Syngenta Flowers. I am located in lovely Southwest Florida. So I'm sure I'm making very many of you jealous with our weather, and glad to be here. And hopefully we get to share some great tips with you.
I'm very confident you will. Okay, Tracy, you want to go next?
Sure. So I am Tracy Lee Zogby. I am located in Western North Carolina in the mountains. So also the Southeast, but a very, very different climate. So it's good to have that variety here, I think. I am with Cicada Seeds. Cicada is a breeder producer for both vegetables and ornamental flowers. I've worked in both and currently work in our vegetable division. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And Peter.
Hi, Peter Westerby. Oh, you hear that echo? I apologize.
We have a little bit of an echo, yeah.
I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I work for Seminis Vegetable Seed. I'm the area rep here for both home garden and commercial. And we'll try to fix this echo. Sorry about that.
Okay, thanks. So I think this is going to be a big learning experience for me because I grew up in Missouri and now live in Chicago. So I don't know too much about the Southeast. And I was kind of joking with my panelists that I wasn't even sure which questions to ask. So they have helped me pull together the questions. Plus, I know that we will get questions from all of you. But one of the things I wanted to start with, and we put this on the presentation, is to talk about zones. So Tracy, you and I talked about zones first. So why don't you launch this and then the other two can join in when we're talking about these 5 different zones that make up the Southeast?
Sure. So yes, when we at first started talking about this topic, it actually sort of scared me because I thought, okay, well, how do we talk about gardening in the Southeast? Because we all have quite different circumstances for the most part. And so looking at just a regular zone map doesn't necessarily, give you the type of background that we've all experienced over the years. And then particularly for me, I grew up on the coast in South Carolina. If you look at this chart, it shows where the light green is. I moved to Pennsylvania and experienced Zone 6A, and now I'm back in the mountains in North Carolina, which surprisingly is also Zone 6A. So it's as if I never left Pennsylvania. Whereas someone like Steffi has, an absolutely entirely different experience and different tips she has to know. So as we were talking through this, we thought, let's talk about all of our differences and, what we can do, what the similarities are, and then how you break off from that to learn about your specific differences. And I think this planting map is a little more general, but it shows at least what I think of as the different areas of the Southeast a little more clearly.
And it is from Southern Living and they specialize in that area. So that's why we thought that one would be fairly good. Let's see here, Steffi or Peter, anything else that you want to add when you're talking about these zones?
No, just know your elevation, whether or not you are in a cold spot or not, because that can be very, very specific to where your actual garden is.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, especially for my friends down in Florida here, how close you're located to the beach. That's can be a huge thing that can play into your gardens and your landscape, because whether it's things from sandy soil to the amount of salt spray that you are going to get, that can play a big part into things. So a little tidbit to always kind of keep in the back of your mind as well.
I'd like to also add, just because I saw a comment pop up already, this map, what we were really looking at were the colors of the general regions, and how we think about, there's a mountainous region, there's a Piedmont region, there's a coastal region. These zones that they list are very specific. And in fact, in my opinion, we had talked about this, it really encompasses a zone or a half of a zone on one side and the other. So I wouldn't concentrate so much on the fact that they only list one zone per color on this particular map, but it's more about the general, area. For example, I'm in what shows here is yellow. My zone is actually, as I mentioned, 6A, even though it says 7 here, but we're just talking about the general regions. You still need to check your specific location and zone.
Absolutely. And I noticed that Gail just posted the USDA hardiness map zone. So yeah, that is very important that you know exactly what it is. I mean, we could only make this so large for the presentation. So yeah, it's generalities. Everybody should put in their own zip code, and then you've got one much more specific to your local area. Okay, why don't we now kind of talk about the differences in each zone? And I'm sure each one of you can jump in, because I think we have 3 of these zones represented with our panelists. So let's hear. Tracy, are you in the mountainous one?
I am right now. I've lived in both the coastal regions and the mountains. Right now I'm in the mountains, and it is very, very different. And as I mentioned, it's more akin to the north. A few of the top things that I love about what I am able to grow here versus other areas are conifers, for one. I've really gotten into conifers lately, using the different colors and textures to create interest in the garden. And even some of my friends that are gardening as close as 2 hours south of me can't necessarily use that same breadth of conifers. So it's something really interesting to look into. Ferns is another one. A lot of the perennials that are for shade. The mountains here have so many deciduous and hardwood trees that provide ample shade almost everywhere you go. The other thing that we have here is an incredible amount of rain. Drought is never a problem in the mountains. And so that's another thing that creates a more lush landscape and allows us to, not have to worry about drought plants and things like that. So lushness, greenness, and some different types of perennials and shrubs that we wouldn't be able to grow other places is what I really like about here and gardening.
Awesome. Okay. Let's hear. Peter, are you middle south or lower south or coastal? I can't remember what you said.
Probably more middle. We're solidly zone 7 here in Raleigh. Yeah, and oftentimes we have to play the game of what year are we in. We were warm spring or a cold spring, because we kind of float between 7 and 8 in a lot of ways, depending on where you're at in this middle area. But yeah, it's a little bit more of a timing thing and what you feel comfortable doing in a given year, when you really think you're frost free or not, that sort of thing in terms of gardening. But we don't have the luxury of the daytime nighttime temperature variability or gap they have in the mountains. We have a little more nighttime stress from humidity and high nighttime temperatures in the middle area of the state, in middle zone 7. But we can grow a lot of things well. We don't necessarily aren't the perfect spot for a lot of things, though. That's sort of how you kind of got to look at zone 7.
I think all of us, no matter where you are, have that issue. We always wish we could grow more. So who would like to talk about lower south?
Well,
So I see this a little bit more almost like Peter. It's almost like you're in between the middle and the lower, because this is really right before you get to the coast, right? So all of a sudden you have pine trees everywhere. You have pine straw mulch you can use. I don't know. Do you consider yourself more in between lower and middle? This looks like Raleigh to me.
Well,
I don't
probably
know.
solely in zone 7. Zone 8's like Georgia, places like that.
Yeah, yeah.
I have some customers on there. Haas Tools is down solidly in
Oh,
zone
yeah.
8.
Hmm.
And they're essentially a month earlier than zone 7. They have the same issues with generally lighter soil types. So irrigation is more of a you got a dot. You need to worry about different diseases down in that part of the world that maybe you don't in zone 7 or zone 6. And
You get
even
the
to some
heat
degree,
stress. Yeah.
insect pressures are different down there. They have whitefly pressure in zones 9 and zone 8 that we don't in zone 7 and zone 6.
Yeah.
So there are things you need to know to know what zone you're in, so you know what you're fighting. Let's put it that way. And there are some big differences even within the South between zones and regions into what those pests or diseases are.
Which that is definitely something on our list of things to talk about when we get to that. So Stephanie, you're kind of quiet and we're getting into
Yep.
coastal and tropical. So why don't we let you jump in here?
Yeah, just a fun area to almost grow annuals all year round. So these are one of those places that becomes very interesting as far as weather is concerned. And, we have our handful of cool nights occasionally. I speak to Florida heavily because that's where I've grown and known the best, besides where I grew up. But yeah, this is one of those fun places to see everything. But as far as all those fun things, you still have some of your woodies in there too. Don't get me wrong, but you can pair it in with some of the tropical stuff. So I think that leads us into the into the tropics. And yeah, this one's fun. So we see right now we're in the dry season, as everyone knows here. And then also it goes into the rainy season here in the next couple of months. So we're dealing with two different scenarios. You have the ability to hold on to, two different things and maybe create two different seasonalities when you're gardening, which is fun to change up, fun to play around with, and, also some container items too. So yeah, gives you some versatility there as well.
Excellent. So that is our overall descriptions of the growing areas and different zones. So I've already heard several things that maybe we want to talk a little bit more about. I'm understanding that the soils can be dramatically different in each of these zones. So does somebody want to talk about that and then make suggestions on how you make your growing medium, your growing conditions a little bit better to withstand and produce better plants, have a better garden?
Well, I think just trailing on the ends of the tropical South, I did mention, a lot of people are up against beaches, or we rarely are above sea level, or just a little bit above sea level. So that plays into things. Yes, it's awesome for drainage, aeration of roots, and things along those lines. But also, there's no organic matter to help plow those plants through to gain those nutrients. So you might have to look at fertilizing a little bit. You might have to look at plants that just do well with sandy soils. And create that root structure to do that. So there's a lot of different things to take into consideration when making your garden choices. And hopefully, when we go through a little bit further, we help tackle those thought processes.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's the sandy soil. Tracy and Peter, what kind of soil challenges do you have in your regions?
Red clay.
Yes,
Red clay is not fun.
Yeah, yep. And so you kind of do the same thing, right? You have to add more amendments, more organic matter to break up all that clay.
Yeah, and sand and you'll see a lot of, at least for smaller either farmer growers or homeowners, raised beds are popular in clay areas, and eliminates all that work you have to do to make clay soils, proper garden sites.
Yeah, yeah. So Tracy, that means that if Steffi has sand, Peter has clay, does that mean that yours is like Goldilocks and the Three Bears? Yours is perfect?
Well, our soil itself is wonderful. It's but there are a couple of problems that go along with having this wonderful, dark, rich soil. The mountainous area is really known, and a lot from the minerals and things that come from all the rocks around here, to have really dark, nutrient rich, really highly sought after agricultural soil. A couple of the things that you still have to deal with, though, are rocks. And I mean rocks. I cannot dig a hole with a shovel. I have to start digging a hole with a pickaxe until I can get enough of the rocks out to then dig a shovel, use a shovel. The other thing is what I mentioned earlier about water. That soil is beautiful, certain times of the year, but a large portion of the year, it can turn into pure muck with all the rain. So one thing we have to do, I have literally, every time I have had to plant something, I have to take the pickaxe, dig out the rocks, see what I'm left with, and actually add back volume. So I have to add soil, just because the volume of rock that you're removing means you don't have as much soil, right? Because that area was taken up with the rock. And then the other thing is add in amendments to make it not so dense and able to drain better. So those are the two things. The two big things here, but the soil itself is gorgeous.
Excellent. Lucky you. So now we were going to talk a little bit about climate, seasonal change, unpredictability. I'm in the north. So basically it's cold and we don't grow a thing from November through May, basically. And we can push spring a little bit. But you guys kind of have a little bit of a different issue. So does somebody want to talk about some of those challenges?
Well, it's year round in Florida. So, and I'm sure some of those southern parts in Texas too, they are year round all the time. And it's nonstop for us. I feel that you can always do something in the garden, no matter what time of year it is. So just keep on going. This is one of those spots.
And then as you go a little bit further north, I'm sure Mother Nature throws some curveballs sometimes. I'm thinking that you're getting some really warm days, and then all of a sudden you guys might get a frost or snow at unexpected times, I'm guessing.
Yeah, frontal boundaries when they come through the east in spring can always go from 80s to 40s pretty quickly. But I don't think really the norms of when we plant traditionally in Zone 7 have changed much. Traditionally we start putting things in the ground, either seed or transplants, in mid to late April, and we're done sometime in mid to late October. That may vary about where you're at, but for the most part, you can operate within those windows and you're fine. Doesn't mean you won't catch a late frost, depending on when the full moon is in April. Doesn't mean that you won't get a very late fall and not have a frost until mid-November. But as a general rule, we operate in those boundaries, and they haven't changed much in my lifetime. That's pretty much how we schedule things. And it doesn't mean you don't push the boundary a little bit. And but for the most part, that's how you structure your gardening cycle here in Zone 7.
And one of the things that we always do, and it sounds like it's even more important, is especially if you're a new beginner, new gardener, and you really need some advice, you just talk to the local experts. Talk to your local garden center, find a master gardener group, find extension, find people like our panelist, because your tendency might go, oh, I'm going to go online and find something. But even though it's the Southeast, it may be very, very different for your specific area. So always glom on to those local gardeners for advice, because especially if they've been doing it for years, they're going to have some good experience to share.
Yeah, and I've done that over the years. I'm sure a lot of our guests and our panelists do, you know, a wall of books having to do with horticulture and various topics. And back living here prior on the coast, and now I'm finding it is really important to seek out those books that are about your region, and they're there for their, you know, Southeast gardeners know that every place is a little bit different. So I have books that tell me about, you know, gardening in Appalachian. I have different books that tell me about gardening in the Piedmont or gardening on the coast. It's very different information, and it's good to see all of it. For my timing and zones, it's similar to Peter's, but pushed back on the end, but it pushed back on the beginning. So once I moved back, honestly, I had forgotten, and I was, you know, sort of ready to, I was thinking back in my coastal days, and I was getting seeds and ready to do things. And everybody's like, you're crazy. You know, the first March, April, May around here is just so erratic that you just don't, just hold yourself back, you know, try to contain yourself. And the timing that everybody says around here is Mother's Day, which is more appropriate. So middle to end of May is really when you want to try to hold off putting anything outside here. And in March, April, and the beginning of May, we do have 80-degree days and then the next day is 40 degrees. And we have a rainy season. The end of March through April is extremely rainy, and it will rain for 9-10 days at a time. And then we have a windy season like March. I've never seen so much wind. And so you don't want to put, you know, you don't want to put your young plants out early and then have the wind come. And I mean, the wind is whipping the established, you know, shrubs and trees. You don't want the wind hurting the young tender plants. So it's good to let all that craziness go through and wait till Mother's Day.
As hard as it is.
Yes.
Wait. Yeah, sometimes we have to do that. Very true. Another thing, you know, I wanted to kind of talk about things that are unique to the Southeast, and I've heard a lot about pest pressure. Sounds like the further south you go, the worse it gets. Don't have those frosts to kill off the pest, the pesty pest. You want the good ones. So do you guys have some commentary on that and how you deal with it? Somebody had said we fight the whiteflies on our gardenia every year. So any kind of suggestions you have to fight the pest and disease pressure that's unique to the Southeast?
Well, I think anyone would tell you, know your enemy, right? In zone 7, 8, and 9, you have aphid and thrip and whitefly vector diseases that you can mitigate largely, not exclusively, but largely through varietal choice, or at least mitigate to some degree. If you're growing hybrids or choose to grow hybrids, and I'm talking about mainly on the vegetable front, you can definitely select towards disease resistances that are in your area. You have, of course, have to know what they are. Zone 9 and 8 and 10 have whitefly vectored viruses that we don't traditionally have further north. You could say the same thing about some of your aphid vectored viruses in cucurbits, that we don't, for instance, have much cucumber mosaic virus in the Southeast. They do in the Northeast, but we have papaya ring spot virus in the Southeast that doesn't exist in the Northeast. So they're, you know, that's getting pretty technical, but if you're talking to experts in your area and they can help you make those choices and know what you're actually going to face, you can through genetic choice mitigate some, certainly not all, of your disease issues, both in terms of rooting disease and insect vector disease. But it does vary quite a bit across the South in terms of what you're actually going to face.
So again, know which diseases are prevalent, and then talk to your local garden center, find out which varieties, and always looking at the newer varieties, the newer hybrids, because the breeding companies are doing exactly that. They're staying on top of all these diseases and how they're morphing. I mean, right, there's different races. So you may have a tomato that you think is disease resistant. Well, there's a new race or a new strain coming out, correct, Peter?
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people choose to grow open pollinated varieties, which is perfectly fine, but also know what you're agreeing to tackle when you do that. And if you're a new gardener, that's a choice you'll make. You know, do you want to you know, grow open pollinated varieties that you may want to save seed from or whatever? If that's your choice, that's perfectly fine, but you'll need to understand what you're accepting along with that choice. And it may be that you're choosing a harder route to success in the garden.
Right. So there's both available. And maybe if you could do a quick definition between open pollinated and hybrid for everybody.
Well, open pollinated are varieties that are true to themselves. So you could, it's traditionally in our cult is what people want to save seed of. It's your heirloom tomatoes is the obvious example. Most of your hybrids, which are the companies like I work for and Cicada, which Tracy works for, we're primarily in the hybrid business, which means we're taking two parents, crossing them to create a variety that we're seeking certain traits out of. And in the home garden community, depending on the crop and the species, you have a mix of hybrids or open pollinated dominance in that particular space. So it just, and in the flower world, I think it's largely the same. So it often comes down to grower choice and what priorities they're placing on their garden and whether they want to be able to save seed or whether they have disease resistances they need to be successful. I certainly in my garden, that's the route I go because we have, for tomatoes, for instance, we have tomato spotted wilt every year. And you can want to grow an heirloom, but it's probably not going to make it. So I tend to choose only varieties for tomatoes that have tomato spotted wilt virus where my garden is in Eastern North Carolina.
Right.
I rarely can get a season-long varietal life out of a non-spotted wilt resistant tomato.
So we like to say that an informed consumer is a good consumer. And so
Yep.
This is, I think you outlined it perfectly of these are your choices and these are the challenges you'll have with this versus this. So thank you for that. And, that's a perfect segue because we do have some new varieties here that I wanted to go through. I think we maybe have like 30 slides, so we won't spend much time on them, but pretty much everyone in here comes from our panelists. So Stephanie, I think you had given me some perennials that you think do well in the Southeast. So we'll let you go through and talk about some of these perennials.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple really tried and true ones for me down here in the South that I really lean heavily towards. First one is one of our Coreopsis. This is a grandiflora type. So very floriferous. This is called Castello Compact Gold. Really densely branched, throws out some really great color. And I think the seasonality on that here in Florida, it's really going to show its best through the winter months into probably around mid-May is really when it's going to show its ultimate piece here. So really, really great one. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. This is another one I slotted in. We certainly mentioned Southern Living in the beginning, and I'm sure a lot of people are aware that there are Southern Living and Sunset plant collections, and this Gaillardia came from the Sunset plant collection. So I'm not saying that it's going to exactly match with the South, but so many of the Sunset Living zones, which are out in California and on the West Coast, are similar to certain areas in the Southeast. And that's why I wanted to put this Gaillardia.
This one is by far my favorite perennial. Not only have I grown acres of this guy, but it is a tried and true performer within the Syngenta perennial lineup. And for the dry season, like we're going through in Florida right here, this one is awesome. The bloom size on them is great. It attracts the pollinators, which is another huge bonus. Plus, it just has a really nice contained mounding habit, which might be great for front borders of your garden beds, and really just a tried and true performer in my book for sure. So really a big fan of it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, then I have the hibiscus honeymoon. This one comes from the seed side of things. So this one's really interesting, a giant bloom to it. Now, hibiscus can go from as far south down by me in Florida, all the way probably up to where Peter is. Maybe Tracy can play along with it a little bit. But yeah, this one really has a good version to either treat it as an annual or for people further south, as I am, into Florida.
Can I add something on this one?
Sure,
Just
absolutely.
because I absolutely love hibiscus and I love this one. And you make a good point that we do grow this. My neighbor has a beautiful one that I look out the window every day at, and it is because we treat it as an annual or in a pot.
Yep.
Like I put it in a giant pot and I'm willing to drag it into my,
That's what I do.
garage so that I
Exactly.
can enjoy this. So
Yes.
for a lot of these, that's great.
Yeah, I have
Yeah,
hibiscus
thank you.
that we put in a greenhouse every winter. Prune back, bring it out in the spring, and we've had them for 3 or 4 years now.
Yeah,
Same plant.
perfect. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. So now we're going to talk about a few annuals, and I think you guys are just going to have to jump in. We probably have a lot kind of interspersed here. Now, I put this one in here, also known as kangaroo paw, but it comes from Australia, so it's very drought resistant. So maybe not for you, Tracy, but for some of the hot, dry areas, we thought Celebrations Fireworks. It comes in 2 other color varieties, also called Mardi Gras and Carnival. So putting one in from down under is the first one here.
Diane, will that work good around sidewalks and areas like that retain a lot of heat?
I would think it would. I haven't grown it that way, but my gut instinct would be like, yeah, because it's just really durable. So you can try it and let us know next year.
We'll write it down.
Yeah, there you go. Tracy, I'll let you talk about this one. It's an AAS winner, but I'll let you talk about it.
Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
This is one of my favorites. Celosia was the very first plant that my grandmother transplanted with me into the garden. So it's how I learned. And again, very heat tolerant, very drought tolerant, but very humid tolerant. So, in the coastal regions up until, we get a lot of humidity here with the rain too. So this can go in a lot of different areas and do really well. It also, what I like about this is it has such vibrant colors and they're non-fading. So a lot of times Celosia can fade over the season, and you can put this in and it'll last all season without fading. Really gorgeous, sturdy blooms.
And just a little note here that National Garden Bureau has declared 2023 the year of the celosia. So there's all kinds of celosias out there that you can try, but we would love for you to try Flamma Orange since it's an AES winner. Yeah. Okay, Steffi, how about some lantana?
Yeah, lantana. This one's always fun, brings a lot of life and color into your garden. This is our newest series. It's called Bandalista. So what this one is noted for is really strong vigor. So I'm thinking hanging baskets is the ultimate spot for this one. So we have a couple mixes called Go Coconuts, which is great. And then another one called the Red Chili Mix, which incorporates the 4 different colors that we have into anyone's garden. But this is fun because drought tolerance, pollinators, you name it. This is a great one for the garden, especially in the South.
And
All right, I'm going to add something on this one too, because it's another one of my favorites.
Yeah.
It is so sturdy. I mean, when you said how sturdy it was, I'm going to tell you, a person that takes care of my neighbor's yard, I suggested this plant for them and they had it by their mailbox, around their mailbox, and someone accidentally whacked the whole thing down with a weed eater. And everybody was devastated, and it just came right back and looks as good as new.
Even better, right?
Yep.
The other thing about lantana is deer and rabbits don't like it.
Yes.
I know at our church last year, the rabbits ate almost everything that was planted. and I came back in and planted lantana, and we solved that problem. So for those of you that have deer and rabbit problems, they will not eat lantana.
Woohoo, we found something. Wow. That's great. And Steffi, can you talk about the sterility of lantana?
Yeah, so the coconut is the only one that is not. So it will do a little bit of seeding on there, but we purposely at Syngenta Flowers want to create a sterile lantana just for the fact that, you know, it can move. And so that is our breeding efforts at Syngenta Flowers to bring that down so things don't just go crazy out in the garden and you're battling it all the time. So that is one of our main breeding focuses there.
Great.
And we can get lantana to perennialize in coastal zone 7 pretty routinely. If you go down towards Wilmington, Myrtle Beach, down that way, lantana fairly readily perennializes down there. This area I'm in Raleigh is probably the northern western limit of that. But if you're in coastal South Carolina, coastal North Carolina, lantana will almost every year, barring what we had like this December where it got down into teens, it will almost always perennialize.
Yep.
Added bonus. Okay. Tracy, Cicada has a lantana also.
Yeah. So also, I mean, a couple of the points here on this one, we've talked about, you know, the lantana in general and how wonderful it is, but this one has a really mounded habit that it sort of stays very neat. So it's, you know, as we talked about lantanas down on the coast where Peter was just describing, they can get into quite large bushes sometimes. And so this one, it's really about keeping that really tight habit that's covered with leaves and covered with flowers all around the top. So it's also actually perfect for large containers. So it's really good for both of those things.
Great, thank you. Okay, now we have a pentas, and I think both of these are from Steffi.
Yeah, so pentas this one is new. This one is called Beehive White. Really enjoy this one. We just have white at the moment, but I feel there is more coming. But this one has proven to just get better and better with time. It creates this great mounding habit, keeps pushing out new flowers throughout the seasons, whether it's your winters down here in Florida through the summertime, heat, humidity, with all that goodness. So this one in my book is really great for going all year round in a place like Florida or some of those warmer pieces, and creates a great white flower. Then I have the Star Cluster Cascade. This one's really cool. There's 4 colors in there. And, you know, where I see this being utilized the best is definitely in a hanging basket. So again, pentas love that warm, hot, humid condition to them. This is where these guys win heavily. And then you can intermix them all to create some great flair.
Great, thank you. And this one we put in because the Scaevola is naturally known as a heat-loving annual, and this is a new one from Suntory, another one of our members, called Cerdiva Lilac Mist. So that's another good annual. And now we got a Vinca. You're gonna have to explain XDR.
I will, don't you worry. So Vinca is always great for the South. And as Diane referenced, the XDR, this one stands for extra disease resistance. We love promoting this line because one of our breeders has, you know, come together with other studies saying that, you know, we always deal with Phytophthora as one of our main disease pressures for Vinca. And this is where XDR really comes into play because it is, you know, really strongly held against over 23 different strains of Phytophthora for the South. And that is huge when it comes to the issues that Vinca experiences, especially in the summertime when the heavy rains come through and we really have those inclement weathers. So this is where this item really heavily wins for the South.
Excellent. Okay, now we have another AAS winner. It says it's from Territorial. They submitted it, but it is bred by Cicada, and it's a gold medal winner.
Yes. Well, many reasons I think it won a gold medal. One is I just think it's beautiful. The difference in colors there. These are not the tall cutting zinnia types, right? These are the mounding types that you would use either in containers or along for edging or that type of thing. So you can see it only gets 12 to 18 inches tall, but it fills out very nicely into a nice mound that can go up to about 20, 22 inches wide. It was bred to be even more heat tolerant than the typical zinnia and even more drought tolerant than the typical zinnia, but also disease tolerant. So, zinnias, if it gets humid or wet, can really have problems with powdery mildew. So you have to add that in there as well if you really want something to last a whole season. And zinnia profusions, the whole group of them, they come in many, many different colors, have been around now out there and very easy to find it at almost all of your local garden centers for at least a decade. And so adding this really interesting new mix of it's not a mix, it's just a variant in the color flower, gives it a whole nother punch, I think, but it still gives you that really hardy plant habit and those resistances that you need to have the zinnia last up through fall. So we all have a lot of experience with profusions, I think. And so the AAS Gold Medal really showed that in the vast variety of conditions that it was planted, that it really held up well, regardless of what those conditions were.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. And Syngenta has a new series of zinnia out. So
Yes.
this is the last annual, and then we're going to go on to vegetables. So Steffi, tell us about Zydeco.
Yeah, so Zydeco is a really fun double flowered zinnia. It really holds up, just as Tracy mentioned, the profusion, which I'm a big fan of as well. Zydeco, gives you another opportunity to have some disease resistance with those hot, humid days, because we know that, zinnias can have some disease pressure when we get into it, but then also that double flower to it really, really stands out. Plus the bright colors with it as well in a very controlled mounding habit, which, just brings those pops into the garden. So this one's really great, really interesting to look forward to.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to get into edibles or vegetables. And Peter, I think you had said, well, pretty much anything goes. We can grow almost anything down here. And it's interesting when we look at our AAS trials, sure enough, the Southeast judges are like, love it, love it, love it. So lucky you can grow about anything. I did include a couple of things in here that are maybe not from our panelists, but just to show the wide variety of things that you might be able to grow. And this is by no means an all-encompassing list. So of course you can grow beans. So Peter, I don't know if you want to kind of take over here, and I'll just zip through some of the edibles that we have here.
As a general rule, there's not much disease resistance in beans that would make one variety more or less adaptable to the Southeast. I think from a gardener's perspective, and this is what I do, is I've gone to where I want to grow my beans vertically on trellises for the most part. And for two reasons. One, I can pick those varieties longer because I don't need a lot at one time. I'm not canning them. If you're canning them, you want to grow a bush type for sure, because you want the concentration of set. But if you're going to do what I do, which is pick them basically weekly and eat them as you go, my suggestion would be to trellis them. You'll pick longer and you'll have better airflow through the plant. And as a result of that, you'll have tendency to have less disease.
Oh, perfect tip. Love it. Okay. What about celery?
I don't know how many people grow celery. It's not the easiest thing to grow. However, if you do choose to grow it, and you certainly can, I would recommend you grow it from transplant, not from seed. but small cell size transplants. Don't put them in like a large 1 inch or something like that. Grow them in small cells. Spacing is important. Obviously, anybody who's eating celery knows they're mostly water, so they require a lot of water. So while you may want to put them on sandy soils, you're going to have to water them a lot.
Okay, another good tip there. Okay, what about lettuces? I mean, there's tons of lettuces out there. Tracy, this is from you guys. It's a beautifully colored one. You want to give us any tips about growing lettuces in the South?
Yeah, so we had talked about this earlier, that depending on where you are in the South, this is a cool season crop, right? So you want to grow it. You can grow it before you put your main summer vegetables in, and you can direct sow it. You can sprinkle the seeds, and you can let it grow. If you sprinkle the seeds pretty heavily, you can let it grow as a baby leaf, which is like really fast and comes up in like 20 days or so, that you can take your scissors out there and you can make a mix like you would buy a mix in the grocery store. Or you can let them get to a full, if you do that, you can just keep cutting it, and you can keep sowing a few seeds, successive sow them every couple of weeks. It is a cut and come again, so they'll come back up, or you can wait till it gets to whole head if you want more. But one thing about planting it in the cool season times, depending on where you are in the Southeast, some spring seasons are just a blip and some are very defined and long. And then the same thing with the fall. In some areas in the Southeast, the fall is just a blip and winter's there before you know it. That's the case for me. And so, for my area, I tend to actually concentrate on planting these types of things in the spring, because I know that I have a longer period to enjoy them. And I just don't bother in the fall, unless it may be, maybe 1 or 2 runs of this at 20 days before harvest. So, but with that being said, leaf lettuces are really good for their versatility. Another thing that I love to do is intersperse them in my containers of spring annuals. It's really pretty, I think, to put a mixed container at your front door or at your back door and have lettuces mixed in there. It doesn't all have to be annuals. And then the same thing, there have been many years where I have sown my lettuce as an edge around my annual bed. And again, it's just beautiful. So it's a good way to diversify and get more lettuce.
Excellent.
And lettuce is expensive these days, by the way, right, Peter? There are serious problems in California where 90-something% of the lettuce comes from. So it's a great one to grow your own.
And lettuce is fantastic in a raised bed. It loves being in a raised bed. And it, as a general rule, iceberg and romaine lettuces, are which the 2 main ones that come from California, don't do well in the South. But your loose leaves, the oak leaf you just showed, those types, your bib lettuces, tend to do better. So if I would recommend, if you're going to grow lettuces, grow the oak leaves or the loose leaf types, and stay away from romaine and iceberg types.
For sure, especially if you want the whole head. I'll admit, I actually do grow romaine and iceberg only because I cut them when they're 3 inches tall as a baby leaf, and it adds some pretty interesting interest into the others.
And you have cool nights up there.
And I have cool nights, but I would not bother to do them as a whole head.
I've tried it and quit trying it.
Yeah.
That's how we learn. We try and learn from our failures as well as our mistakes. I mean, our failures as well as our successes. I put okra in here, definitely known as a Southern. This is also an AAS winner and is a round potted reddish burgundy one. And so this one won just a few years ago. And I think the one thing that the judges were saying is, I just can't keep up with the harvest. So it is a very high yielding okra. Then we go on to Steffi. I think this is your basket of fire pepper.
Yes, it is. This comes from our Vegetalis line. And this one I thought was really interesting and really provides some great qualities. And I mean, you can have colors from deep purple, yellow, orange out of this guy. And I was also given the idea to put this in a hanging basket and really extend that seasonality on it. And I mean, you can use it from anything from eating it fresh to making some salsas to freeze drying them to pickles, marinades, you name it. So the versatility on this one really is interesting and super colorful too.
Yeah,
Yeah, the only thing I would say about ornamental pepper is
know it's
they
a
don't
whitefly
like to be
magnet.
crowded. They don't like to be crowded. If you're putting them in a bed
Yeah.
space somewhere, and I've learned this from experience because I grow ornamental peppers every year and put them in my landscape. They need more space than some other things do. And I think it's largely because they're a pepper, and pepper
Yeah.
are sun lovers. And if you crowd them and shade them, they just get kind of lost.
Mhm.
So if you're going to grow these, and I would encourage you to grow them, give them some sun,
Mhm.
give them space.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is a new AAS winner that I put in, and earlier Peter was talking about beans, and a bush type will give you the harvest all at once if you're wanting to can. This is what was unique about this jalapeno pepper, is the way that it would really produce and come to maturity all at one time. So this also is really good if you're wanting to do some canning or preserving of some sort for jalapeno. So this one's called San Joaquin. And Peter, I know you love your peppers. You can talk about this one.
Yeah, Wildcats. It's called a lot of things in a lot of parts of the world. This type of pepper is what they make harissa out of in Northern Africa. Medium heat level. You can see how pretty the color is. They're from a culinary perspective, you would use them for a lot of what you see people using the kind of medium to low heat, longer peppers for diced or in rings or whatever, but very prolific. These things yield like crazy on a plant to plant basis. You won't need many of them. But yeah, this is the type of pepper they make harissa out of in Northern Africa. So if you're used to harissa and you know that heat level, that's what this is. Very, very nice, beautiful pepper.
And another AAS winner, Bossa Nova. Love this one.
Yeah, Bossa Nova is kind of a unique in the squash world in the U.S. This is the common type in Brazil. I understand it. Bossa Nova is a type of dance in Brazil, so thus the name. I think the key here is the disease resistance. So when you look on this and you see that WMV and ZYMV, those are our two most common aphid vectored viruses in the Southeast. And whether you're going to grow this variety or another variety in the Southeast, if you can buy a zucchini variety or even a yellow squash variety that has those nomenclatures on it, you have a far better chance of success. And this is one of the areas, squash, cucurbits in general, but squash in particular, where modern genetics for a home gardener are far more likely to give you success than older open pollinated genetics are. And it's primarily based around disease resistance. In this case, viral disease. This also has some pretty good powdery mildew resistances. So this variety in particular works great in the Southeast. I grow it every year. It is a more compact variety. So for you raised bed guys and gals, this is a very good variety for that. The internodes are fairly short. But in general, if you're going to grow zucchini or yellow squash at all in the Southeast, you would be wise to try to utilize varieties that have disease resistances, particularly viral disease resistances like Bossa Nova has.
Great. So we have a couple more tomatoes and watermelons, but I'm looking at our time that we're running out of time, because one of the things that I wanted to do to conclude is I want each of our three panelists to give their number one gardening tip for the Southeast, and also what are 2 or 3 of your favorite plants that you're really successful with in the Southeast. So Peter, you're on my screen. You want to start with your best gardening tip for somebody in the Southeast?
Well, I think I've already reiterated it because of around disease resistance, and there's so much choice for home gardeners now. There's so many opportunities to look in different sources of varieties, and that mix of knowing what you need disease resistance wise, including nematodes. There's good nematode resistance now in a lot of edible genetics, and what you want to accomplish as a gardener. That would be my number one tip: is invest that time in the winter to do that research, because if you're only planting 3 or 5 tomato plants, which research tells us a lot of home gardeners are only planting, less than 10, losing 1 or losing 2 from a preventable disease is something that I think most people would want to avoid. What do I grow? I love zinnias. I grow the cutting type zinnias more, mainly because I have space for that, and I like to cut zinnias and deliver them to different people. Edible wise, what I use the most is probably cucurbits, squash and cucumbers. I grow a lot of cucumbers in the garden, and I put them on trellises. And that'd be another tip: is if you can trellis it in the Southeast, trellis it. If you have limited space, cucumbers, cucumbers, beans, those type things. One, it spans your space exponentially if you're in a small space. And 2, as a general rule, if you're not like me wanting to or have the time to apply a lot of chemistry to your garden to prevent disease, getting them in the air and getting airflow through them is your best disease resistance management tool.
Awesome.
I love cucumbers. Grow about 4 different kinds.
Holy smokes. Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Steffi, what about you? What's your number one garden tip? And I think we saw some of your favorites, but you can reiterate those.
Sure, no problem. So probably my favorite gardening tip, especially being down here in Florida, watch your weather. That's my biggest thing. It can tell you a lot and help you prepare for what you need to in your gardens, no matter whether if you're in the dry season or in the rainy season. It's helped me exponentially after I made the massive move down to Florida. So that's my gardening tip for down this way. And as far as favorites, yes, as you mentioned, Gaillardia barbican is probably one of my top ones. I love it for multiple reasons. And I think pentas would be another strong performer. Down here, I always have them in my garden. So between those 2, I am always looking for pollinators. I love to see the zebra butterfly in front of my window when I'm working. So that is one of the strong components when I am picking out my flowers.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, Tracy, your tip, if you can limit it to 1, and your favorites.
Okay, so obviously with us in the seed business, right, and me particularly right now in the vegetable side of the world, get asked a lot about vegetable gardening and seed gardening in particular. And so one of the things I like to remind people to be mindful of is if you are growing from seed, a great way to start it is to sow the ones that you can direct seed outdoors. So those are sort of the easiest ones to start with, like the cucurbits that Peter mentioned. Basically anything other than the solanaceous crops, tomatoes and peppers, you could almost sow all of them outside. But when you do that, because of our erratic springs, it's important to allow those seeds to have enough warmth to germinate well. And so I always suggest that when people plant their vegetable garden, they've obviously waited until it's the correct time and, when there's no threat of frost, but don't mulch immediately, because leaving that soil open and allowing that sun to beat down on those seeds is going to give you a much better germination rate. As soon as you cover that bed with mulch, you've cooled everything down. And so that's important to do later, right, when you want to suppress weeds and have less care. But I always like to wait about a month between when you sow any of your seeds and when you put mulch out. You'll have much better success.
Great.
And then, so what are my favorites? So I love small ornamental shrubs and trees. Smoke bush is probably my all-time favorite. So that's a Cotinus is the genus. There are a couple out there, Velvet Fog and Winecraft Black, that are my absolute favorite. But what I like about them is that deep, dark burgundy foliage. So anything that I can plant in my garden that shows color through foliage, and changing between blues and greens and purples, I think just adds interest all times of the year. And I think when I'm thinking about vegetable gardens, I fall into that category that was mentioned earlier of people who plant less than 5 tomato plants every year. I plant 2. I plant Ruby Crush, which is a red grape tomato, and I plant Sun Sugar, which is a golden cherry tomato. I love all the clamshells in the grocery store, the different grape tomatoes and cherry tomatoes in all different colors. We go through a lot. That's very expensive. That's where one plant is worth it. It's bang for your buck on those 2. And they absolutely have the best flavor I've ever tasted. So those are my go-tos.
There you go. There you have it from our experts, their tips, their favorites. And with that, we have fulfilled our hour. If anybody wanted to go over anything, we will send you a link to the recording as well as to the whole slideshow, including the ones that we didn't get to. But with that, thank you, Steffi. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Peter. Enjoy your wonderful weather. It'll get up here soon enough and we'll be out in the garden. So with that, thank you and have a great weekend.
Everybody enjoy the NCAA tournament.
Ah.
Go ACC.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.